welcome. This is our final Friendish conversation. We're finishing up the book in the summer series, which has been so good. Chapter 9 and 10 have some really good content for us that we had to bring in everybody for, coordinator, Bible study teachers, the big guns.
Literally.
Literally.
Rise up and shine.
We're always jealous of those items.
Covered them up today.
Why am I sitting next to you, actually? This is fun. This is fun. We're friends.
Listen,
We're real
I
friends.
have a COVID coat on right now. You don't understand.
Me too. Just
Yeah.
brewing for 2 or 3 years now.
But it's been so fun this summer hearing how different women are coming together, reading with a few, reading with their groups. I know many of us who have been a part of these conversations here have been challenged and encouraged in our own reading and the journey with the Lord. So we're going to jump right in because we want to kind of sum it all up at the end too and talk about some of the highlights and the major takeaways and maybe some of our ish and our friendish stuff. But chapter 9 brings it in with faithful are the wounds, quoting the scriptures and the proverb and talking about friendship in a way that is confronting and what is necessary for true godly friendship. So what were some of our takeaways in chapter 9?
I think for me, it reminded me of a time where I read a book and it was talking about this particular subject of wounding others, but in a good way, and it used the analogy of the guy. He was sitting down with a friend and they were at a coffee shop, and the friend had a bagel, he had some coffee, and they got into talking, and right before they were concluding their conversation, the gentleman who had a nice long beard had a bunch of cream cheese all up in his beard, and so sometimes people put in those positions are conflicted. They're like, okay, one, I can tell you that you got cream cheese all up in your beard, or I could just let you go out there and look foolish, right?
Yes,
And
not
so-
a friend.
Pretend you didn't see it.
To me, yeah. And so he was like, no, I need to tell this, guy, my friend, that, you're about to look really silly with, he had a lot of it. And so he ended up telling him that, but then he stepped back and said, wow, that's what it looks like to be a friend in situations where we may have others, maybe wrestling with sin or wrestling with different, things going on in their life, that they may need somebody to tell them, hey, you got this, on your face. And so it's kind of like, okay, am I going to lose a friend? Because some people, just stop in their tracks because they're like, I don't want to lose a friend because where's that going to put us? Or am I going to love them enough to say, hey, I don't want you to look embarrassed in front of the world, the watching world. And he chose to do the latter. And that really just helped me to remember, that's what it means, faithfully wounding others. We're kind of like, oh yeah, hey, sign me up, wound me all day, right? But it's in a way, it's hard, right? But it's in a way that helps us to grow in Christ and helps the sanctification process in our lives to be more like Jesus, right? And so when I started looking at that way, because I was very a passive aggressive person, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to confront. God really had to shake my heart and help me to realize that that's what that means, and I not only need to give it, but I need to welcome it. Right?
Yes.
And I think the welcoming part of it is the challenge.
Yes.
That idea that I am willing to say, this is what I think you need to be doing with your life, but then to be open and willing to accept that same rebuke is hard. And I definitely, at the beginning of chapter 9 when she says, I was uncomfortable and I knew she was going to say something to me, because for me, making a mistake like that, it feels like failure. You don't necessarily want to hear about it. You're and I think Christians are really good at pointing out other people's flaws, right? Telling everybody about the sin in their lives,
Which is not our own.
Which is not our own, right? The plank in your own eye, right? Yeah. So I that resonated with me a lot, because I sit on two places. One, I want to do everything right. That's my intention. But that I'm also really good at being your life's kind of a mess. So that balance of what does the balance of that look like, right?
Absolutely.
And I like how she gave those steps of things to do before you have the conversation. So kind of when she gave that example of having the plank, removing the speck out of, or the plank out of your own eye before you remove the speck out of your friends, there's a part of us evaluating ourselves before the Lord.
Yes.
And making sure that we're doing these steps so that our hearts are in the right place. And part of that too is like making sure that you're humble before the Lord, and that he's going to put his stamp of approval on the conversation. It's like, well, did I just take that personal because maybe I was defensive, or maybe it's my own, like you were talking about, our own ish or our own insecurities, or is this something that is beneficial for that person, for their growth in their sanctification process with the Lord?
Right.
And so I think that that's something that really stuck out to me when she talked about that, is like that there's this formula for doing that, and it was really helpful.
Yeah.
And how often do we as Christians go through that formula,
Right.
right? You know, I mean, we see that happen all the time in Christian friendships, the calling out.
Yeah.
And I'm just, again, because I'm thinking about this in terms of restoration, calling out, calling in. Sometimes we need to call people in, but we're really good as Christians at just calling people out, right? And so...
And we need to welcome Jesus, first of all, and walking in the Holy Spirit to have our words seasoned in that process before we just be like, hey, girl, I just need to tell you, you know, like, because so many times we can be quick to do that. And so I feel like that was such a great reminder to just welcome Jesus in and take those steps to evaluate ourselves first before we speak to others.
Jesus allows you to call people in because that's not your earthly fleshly intention to call someone in. That's nice. Like that's a warm hug, right? But Jesus allows you to do that. Like it makes it so much easier to do.
Yeah, girl.
So those steps, I'll just decide when it's necessary to speak is a really important one. Before,
Drink to that.
Right?
Timing is everything.
Timing is everything. And I want us to, so in that first step, she mentions exercising restraint by not going to anyone else.
Right.
How about that for ladies and women in friendship?
Yeah.
I think that is such a challenge.
It is.
Like, you know, I got to seek wise counsel, or I got to make sure somebody's praying for me in this. And
Hey, put them on your prayer list.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
I'm like, oh man, Lord, I'm sorry. That's something that I know to build a trusted friendship with anybody and to have a caring, loving conversation. That needs to be a safe place that I've reserved for this friend, if that's something that needs to happen.
Yeah.
There's room for wisdom and wise counsel if it's going to be an intense conversation, and that I think there's room for seeking truly. But again, that's that place of where we prayerfully humble before the Lord. Do we need help before we approach somebody?
There's a wrestling that should happen.
There's a wrestling that happens.
And I love how, I mean, she labeled this redefining the enemy, right? And if we look on 129, she talked about this. These are the people who cut you some slack and give you a night off from the work of holiness, right? If we are having those types of people in our life, we really need to step back and say, is this really pushing me towards Christ, or is it pushing me away from Christ, right? Let's have another drink and tell stories about how much of a jerk he is. But if friendship gives us a license to self-indulgence and bitter anger, then it is no friendship. Okay, let me run that back one more again.
Yeah, say it a couple times for the people
right
in the
back,
back.
right? But if friendship gives us a license to self-indulgence and bitter anger, then it is no friendship. It has become an enemy, luring us away from Jesus and into self-threatening sins. Let that marinate for a little
That
bit.
actually reminded me of something that just happened a few months ago. I have had a challenge with a coworker for a number of years, and long story short, something needed to be done that was celebratory of this person, and I was saying to my very good friend, well, I'm not doing it. And I had a list of reasons why. And again, because this friendship is a God-breathed friendship, she was like, well, I don't think you're being very nice right now. And this is not about you and how you feel about her. This is about celebrating these X number of whatever it is, and you can't get on board with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
But
I'm gonna go pray about
right, no, absolutely, because what I was looking for in that moment was for her to indulge me about, you're right. There have been a lot of wrongs.
Yeah.
She did not do that, and I'm so thankful, that is my friend in Christ, right? Because I think there are some other people who would have just walked me right down that road, right?
That's good. Ooh, so good.
This chapter is like my worst enemy. Confrontation.
I know you talked about this the last time.
Yes,
your Enneagram.
Problems. I don't like conflict. Nothing. And so I can probably count on one hand the amount of times in my 30-ish years how many times I have confronted a friend about something that I know is wrong, or if they've hurt me or wronged me, I justify it like it wasn't a big deal, or I don't really care that much, when really it did hurt my feelings and it should have been addressed. But heavens, I would never say anything. And so this, I mean, I still don't say anything.
We're working on it.
I'm working on it. I just read chapter 9. Working on it.
Well, on the backlog, they said, I wish I would have read this.
Years ago.
Yeah, I think you're ahead of the
Yes.
curve.
There you go.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, it was just a good for someone like me who avoids it at all costs. The steps are helpful, and realizing that I have false friendships. Like if I'm not willing to, per this whole section on putting away falsehood, like like I'm just so scared to like hurt my friend's feeling or feel awkward, so I avoid it. I'm like, okay, then I'm sorry to all my friends out there.
Shout out to
I've been writing a lot of letters of apology, like sniffling them into people's mailboxes. Real sorry. Been reading a book.
hit send on all those emails that were in drafts.
Right.
It's true, and I think that in itself is such a good word, and it is confronting, because I think so, myself included, we can live a lot of our lives unknowingly in that falsehood because we are just avoiding the real stuff of life with people. And she talks about like truthfulness should mark a Christian's encounters with others, and truth and love means sometimes that requires speaking truth to someone.
Absolutely.
And that is loving. It's not, it should always be from that love that the Lord has provided to us, but it's not easy.
No.
And I think we, out of anybody as Christians who have Christ, are compelled to do that, and we are lacking in it. And so I think that is something we've really got to strive for, truthfulness.
And she identifies it as passive-aggressive behavior, which
Oh,
I thought
absolutely.
was just well stated. This idea that
David Kelly got me again.
But just this idea that we often will end a friendship with someone, well, they just don't have the same mindset that I have. Done, right?
Right.
Done. But when she talks about she didn't give the friend the opportunity to try to work things out or to talk things out. It made me super sad. And so this avoidance and passive aggressive behavior is not love. It's a self-centered way to handle conflict in a friendship, preferring your own comfort above all, and that we're called to do something higher than this, and it's not what's easiest.
Yeah, which takes us back to that selfishness chapter of when it's about me and my own comfort.
Which then plays way to, well, I'm not going to confront because it makes me comfortable. If I confront, it makes me uncomfortable.
Right.
So I'm going to do what's the most comfortable, right? Those are our tendencies. And I love even on 129, she talked about, and this is something I feel like we all, for me included, and I've had to really stop and step back and say, okay, am I fostering what she says, non-judgmental kind of community or biblical community?
Yeah.
And I feel like at times I can look back in different seasons. I had non-judgmental communities because it made me feel good. It made me feel justified in the things I felt, even if it was against others. And I'm like, but that's not what I want. I didn't grow. I can look back and say, nope, I was not growing in those relationships, and I wasn't growing in that season. But when I started inviting biblical community for those who were walking in fellowship with me and calling those things out, that's when I grew the most. And I feel like it's important for us as women to really step back and say, which kind of community am I fostering here, right?
Yes,
absolutely.
Oh,
And that confrontation, that biblical confrontation, doesn't have to be a friend ender. And I love that she told that story about her friend that was Muslim, and she sort of, after she had the conversation about Christ, she sort of closed the door. And it's like, well, no, you might have to walk with that person for 10 years, but just because they're Muslim doesn't mean that you can't walk with them. You just continue to share the truth, right? And that's it. But it doesn't have to end a relationship. And I feel like that's something that's also a hallmark sometimes of Christianity, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I did my job. I shared.
And she didn't listen, so I got to move on, right? No, I mean, how many people have a testimony that it took 5 years, 15 years, 20 years, almost their whole life, right, before they received the message. So I thought,
she doesn't really mention this, but something I realized that I have a tendency in doing is counting the cost for the person rather than like letting Jesus do the work. Like, no, you're just an instrument. You're part of sharing, like you said, but and then part of that is us just living our lives, with following the Lord and our own walk with Him. That's going to speak to those people, and that requires spending time together. That requires
trust,
inviting in all of that stuff. But a a lot of that, I tend to get nervous for that person because I count the cost for them. I'm like thinking like, oh, but I don't know, like she's gonna have to give up this, or he's gonna have to give up this or that, and I start thinking, yeah, there's no way this is gonna work. Like, how would this work? But in God's like kingdom, like
So, yeah.
It all works.
I'm like,
yeah,
man, I
His
have
power.
I have a really small view of you, God. Like,
Right.
you are worth it,
Right.
and you can do
And
that.
you know you have the answer, and you
Yeah.
know that nothing else matters because this isn't our home.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Right.
good.
Huh.
And as a performing artist, I deal with a lot of people that have a lot of different lifestyles, right? And I can't come into those situations going, well, you know what, you're this, and so I'm a Christian, so we can't talk. And so just, I mean, a couple of days ago, a friend of mine was dealing with some really challenging thing, and he brought up God, and I was like, okay, all right, let's talk. Let's talk about the back.
door.
But if I had closed that door because I didn't agree with whatever the choices that he was making, then who was going to have that conversation with him? I mean, and you know, so I feel like not that I'm the only person that could, but the opportunity presented itself because I left myself to be open to continue to being friends, because there are things about me that aren't right.
Right.
you
Right,
know?
and I think that's where it's so important, where she says redefining our enemy as followers of Jesus. Our enemy is not. Yes, we have to love our enemies, and so we talk about enemies being people in that way. But our enemy is sin and evil.
Yes.
And so I think that's something that we miss out a lot on. We just have this preservation of Christians and staying together and not realizing, no, like we've been changed by God. We've received a grace and a gift that's not ours. And so we extend that to everybody. They're not the enemy. They're working against the same enemy that we are, and we want them in. Like, let's get them
And the word
in.
you said, extend. I mean, there's an extending that has to happen, and God's working in us too.
Yeah.
And that we have these graduated levels of sin, right?
Yeah.
So I don't do that, so I'm cool, right?
It's above me now.
It's right. But so I think that's where we get into that. We have these graduated levels. So that sin, whatever it is, or it could be all different. That one's the worst one. But God says there isn't a worse one.
Yeah. And then he saves the worst of all. Like,
Yeah,
he
right.
saves
Came
us
for the
all.
sick.
He
Right.
came
Right.
for came for that.
For all of the messiness.
Absolutely.
So there's good steps. We won't belabor each of them, but she goes on, pull the log out of our own eyes, set up a conversation, get a mediator if necessary. And so like loving, truthful confrontation if needed, because faithful are the wounds of a friend. We can see that.
And those steps take out all the pettiness.
Yes.
They take out all the cattiness. They take out all the gossip.
Yes.
There's no
We
room.
don't do that. What are you talking about? Who are you talking to?
Yeah.
People in the back.
Yeah.
It
My
removes
sister.
all of those things. Right? Yeah, my sister.
I have 3 of them, so you don't know which one I'm talking about.
I only have one.
Play it safe, Jenni.
But I love how she ends this chapter on 137. The last paragraph. A friendship that is willing to sail into these tumultuous waters is a priceless gift. And I feel like some of my greatest friendships are ones where we've had to faithfully wound each other in love, because we decided to be truth tellers versus trying to be more considerate of their feelings, you know, at the end of it. And that's people I'm willing to go to bat for and wage war with, because they've been there for me and helped me see the blind spots that I had and the cream cheese I had all in my face in a good way.
Loved me enough.
To tell me that. Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
Which I think
That was
brings
good.
us to that
Good point.
Comrades
for
for the
chapter,
kingdom.
Yes.
Chapter 10.
Chapter
Yes,
10.
closer
Turn it in
than
our
friends.
eyes.
They're closer than friends because they unite for reasons beyond their own friendship. It's really huge for me.
Absolutely.
How did that hit home? I know, Nat, you had mentioned that. What struck you in that?
Yeah, I just love the story about the Easy Company and how he was saying, even like he gave the example of when in that company, even when someone coughed, they knew who coughed, or like walking out in the woods, they knew each other so well that they could recognize the silhouette of whatever soldier was out there. And there is an aspect of, when done right, you know, in this Christian walk, like we become like family. And when we are doing that, we know each other so well. And part of that is when we win each other, like you just said, like there is a growing in our intimacy where we would go to battle with each other and for each other.
Yes.
And so
Yeah,
I
don't
don't,
miss.
Yeah. And don't mess.
Do not mess with my friends.
Right. No, absolutely.
But yeah, it's because we all are soldiers on mission.
Mhm.
And so that's the point of what she's saying. Like we are, we're getting after it. We're not wasting time, and we're in it together. You're like literally in the trenches together.
Mhm.
And it's all in a model of us modeling kindness, humility, sacrificial love, just like Jesus did. So with him being our aim, heaven is our home, then I think that we are willing to battle and lay down our lives for each other, then I think we're going to be going on mission together. We were meant to.
Yes.
So
Right.
I liked that part and story that
In
she
the
gave.
way we were meant to. That's I think that's something, just keep wanting to embrace God's design. And one of the things she says in this portion, embracing your limits, is so I think that's something I would, in the last 5 years of my life, and more importantly in the last 2 years, God has hit me with, that I need to embrace my limits and be willing to ask for help, even though I'm terrible at it. We already talked about that last time. Because I am not called to be, I can't be everything. And
So you're not
that's
Jesus, right?
Right,
Okay.
I'm not. I want to be
Congrats.
like him, but
Right.
I'm going to be like him, you know? It's just impossible. But we all have them. Why do I try and function outside of them?
That was my thing as well. Like the
We talked about
overachiever.
it.
We've talked about this numerous times. The overachiever in me, you know, is like, okay, you need something, I got you. I can do everything, right? And then I am in a corner at home crying. I don't understand why this is happening to me. And my husband and my daughter are just like, they're like, you do this to yourself. Why do you do this to yourself? You know. So I think that was a big thing for me, and I have been embracing this during this season of my calendar being cleared, that no, I can go, someone else can do that, and it's okay.
Yeah, embracing when to, she says, when to say no or when to disappoint.
Right.
It's okay if we say no or we disappoint.
Right.
Like that's not the ultimate failure.
Right.
I don't know where that comes from, the pressure of that.
And she gave that example of even when Jesus went away for solitary, you know, confinement. Escape that. Who's Jesus?
He was just needed quiet. He needed quiet time.
I was in like the soldier mindset.
Yes, easy. Yeah.
We knew what
Got
you
it.
meant.
We
know
know
what
what
you
you
mean.
mean.
You meant. We were tracking with you.
Anyways, when he needed some
Yes.
time with God,
Oh, there we
you
go.
know, and Simon came running. They're like, everyone's looking for you. Where'd you go? You know, they're like kind of frustrated. It sounds like with him, but they're saying because people are here, we need you to heal the people, right? But Jesus didn't heal everybody.
Yep.
And so that was a good point. I thought, just like even he recognized the limits, you know, and then he's like, no, we're going on to the next town. I'm going to heal people there. But it's because he embraced that limit by becoming human too. But he modeled that to us. Like we're just humans.
Yeah,
We need God's help.
just humans, and that this is not all that it is. I had a really great friend, a mentor. She's like, pay attention to what happens when someone passes away. She's like, it's not like the work doesn't stop. You know, people, we can't do that anymore because Nicole's dead. People just come in and right? You know, people just come in and begin to problem solve. So when you say no, that's really what's going to happen. People are going to come in and they're going to problem solve and they're going to figure it out and it's going to be fine. And, you know,
Which brings opportunity.
opportunity to other people.
grow.
Right.
When we stop acting like we can do everything, we really actually help other people grow and operate in their gifts. Because we feel like, oh, I just can't let somebody else do this. I got to do it all, and I love
because nobody's going to do it like me.
Exactly.
Right.
No. Yeah. And we have that. It feeds our pride.
Yeah, it's our pride. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, a couple years ago. Sorry.
No, you get.
At our women's Christmas event that we had out here a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of you remember. I was the events coordinator, and I had a funeral that day that came up, and I'm like, of all the days, like an older gentleman that is in my family passed away.
today?
And then they had to have the funeral.
And
the funeral.
Why on that day? It's been a month. But so insensitive. I'm so sorry.
But this is
We all have those
And I'm like,
thoughts.
it's like my biggest event, the Christmas event.
Yeah, it's a big
And I
deal.
had to rely on other people to set up. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I have a vision. I know how I want it to look. And I get here like, I don't know, half an hour before the event starts. And it's like beautiful. They have the candles lined up here, like way better than I ever could have done. And the whole day I'm stressing like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I get here and it's like amazing. And I'm like, okay, like reality check.
Right.
Like
Okay.
they just did it better than I could.
Yeah.
And just so thankful for the team. I think I'm a lot like you. I'll say yes to everyone. I'll help you. I'll do whatever you need. But I'm not going to ask for help. Like, I can do it myself. And then I just get, like, so stressed and overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure people would want to help me. Like,
Right.
why don't I just ask? I'm afraid of rejection. I don't want them to tell me no. And then I feel stupid. Like, oh my gosh, they told me no.
For years.
That's a mess.
For
Like,
years
yeah.
producing shows, like everyone would refer to it Mrs. Robinson's in show mode, and that meant a lot of things. So there were security measures put in before you come and ask me a question. Ask 2 other people, like but just this intensity, right? Like because I'm trying to do all the things, you know, and realizing as I've gotten older and much more seasoned, you don't need to do all the things. That person over there can do that. That person over there can do that. And they get the agency of making choice, right? Allow people to make choice.
I feel like God, there was a moment, this was a while back, he's like, oh, thank you for keeping the world spinning, Jenni. Like, I don't know if he's sarcastic, but I feel like he said that to me.
Oh, absolutely.
He's like, I think I got this if you don't, so why don't you take a seat? And he usually literally, like, physically sits me out because I get sick or something because I've been running myself too hard.
I fell down the stairs.
I literally fell down my stairs and passed out one time. And then I still came. I'm like, I gotta teach. I'm what am I doing?
Right.
Sit down.
Sit.
But at the
Lay
end,
down.
then I feel like we cut off the community aspect of
Yes.
letting others help us and thrive, and it builds and deepens our relationship. And I love how she talked about the limitless life, right? And social media fosters that, right? On 140, she talks about our command is not to love our Facebook friends as ourselves, right? To love our preferred friends as ourselves, or to love our oldest friends as ourselves, but to love our neighbor as ourselves. And I feel like that's what we have to remember as we are forming these relationships. And again, you use the example of your show and you're like in boss mode, right? When it comes to moving time, which happened just past weekend, I'm like usually in that boss mode, and I'm like commander in chief and giving everybody orders. And God had to just really break me of that and let others, my new community, love on me in that way. And I tell you what, I had to stop myself from ugly crying at least 2 or 3 times because I felt the overwhelming sense of this is what it means to link arms, to have community there, and to let others meet the needs when you feel like you are overspent or want to do it all, because that's how I am. That's how I operate. And so it took every ounce in me to just say, okay, Jesus, I know you got me. And he did. So I feel like that was just a beautiful way that he shows us
that door of community opening up. I mean, I spent probably a good part of my teaching career doing all of the things, and it wasn't until about 6 or 7 years ago that I started bringing in my students to participate in planning and production. And things run great because they feel like they're loving on the program. They're loving each other by doing these things. And their commitment level is way higher than it was for those students where I was running around trying to provide all of the things. So, and it's made my life, I'm much nicer person now. So much nicer. So much that my students are like, who are you? My old students, they're like, who is that? I'm like, listen, just, got to get slapped up beside the head sometimes.
Just a few times.
Just a few times to understand that the center of the universe is not you.
Hey, we all need that. So
Absolutely.
that's another thing that she points out in this chapter that I love is to reevaluate often. And I think that we can never examine ourselves before the Lord too much. I think we can get stuck in our heads, yes, and God's saying, hey, I'm gracious. Why don't you cool your jets at times? Because we can be a little bit uptight. But if we, in each season, reevaluate, wait, staying on mission with God, what does this look like? How do we do that in our friendships? How do we make sure the community where I'm doing my part in staying fixed on Jesus, keeping that eternal perspective as my personal responsibility in that? I have to be fixed there in order to even help us stay on mission as friends. So that's something I think we can lose sight and all of a sudden be dwindling, but it's not an all of a sudden because we just haven't been careful to pay attention to where our eyes are fixed.
Right.
So I think that's huge for us as we eternal kingdom. I love that this came after our study of Matthew too, because the entire thing is seeking first his kingdom, which is his eternal one. And we can't experience it here. I think that's something, there's glimpses in the community of God when functioning as we can in love, we can experience the grace of God like we should, you know? Yes, we live in a broken world, but there's so much goodness.
And some of us are living like this is it. Like this is all that there is, right? When we micromanage things and think if we don't participate in them, that this is it, like it's, and if this is it, ew, right? Like, this is it, like that's all.
Not
yeah,
it.
no,
it.
like
how despairing would that be?
Yeah.
Especially considering where we are, like having our future hope. I mean, I don't know what else is there.
right, which is maybe why this can become very overwhelming. This situation that we're in right now can be very overwhelming. Like what has kept me moving forward is like, I know this is not the worst that it can get, and I know that you have better for me, God. So I'm gonna navigate through this situation that is this pandemic, and give me the things that you need me to learn during this time.
And it's basically everything that you guys are saying is like having an eternal perspective, right? Having that mission in mind and remembering not just the mission, but how we are befriending others. And because I love even here, she talked about we can have deep, meaningful relationships even with those who are not in Christ. I feel like times we just limit it, right? We limit ourselves and say, well, I can't really go deep with that person because they're not a follower of Jesus. But we limit ourselves and we limit the power of God of how we interact with them could lead them to Christ and has led people to Christ. I've heard numerous stories and experienced that myself. And I feel like we just have to remember that befriending others as well, like she talked about in the previous chapters, means having that eternal perspective and keeping that mission in mind, that we're on mission together, and it looks is going to look like this. It's going to look different too, but it can look like us having meaningful relationships with people that are not followers of Jesus. I thought that was pretty dope because I was like, good reminder.
Good reminder.
File that one away.
Yes, for sure.
And challenge me with it so that I make those.
Yeah.
Don't just, that should be a real friendship, even though I might not have the bond of Christ with that woman or friend. Like, cultivate that. Show Christ in how he loves.
And that the friendship's not always about what you get. So we want the person to have a bond with Christ so that so I can get something when I need it. But sometimes that's still not the purpose of that particular relationship.
Yeah. And people are watching, and what an encouragement we are to each other, when we have that mindset and then we see somebody come to faith with that or whatever. It's like so encouraging. It spurs us on. Keep running the race. And I have, it's kind of funny, a short story I have a neighbor across the street, and she's an Indian woman, and been trying to get to know her, and there's a little bit of a language barrier, but she has a little girl around Lily's age, and so they've been coming over and they'll play in like the front yard a little bit, but she's very cautious because COVID's really hard right now to get to know people. It's not really ideal, but little things like that, I'm like being intentional about spending time in our front yard. Like then we can maybe get to know more people. So that's been happening. But we talked a little bit here and there more about what she does. And then she left, and Johnny was like, Mom, why didn't you tell her about Jesus? And I was like, Bud, like usually you want to get to know the person, and you have to be respectful, maybe she believes in other gods. I don't know. I don't want to make a stereotype, but like, I don't know, like what you have to ask these questions and get them to know the person. He's like, I thought you were going to tell her about Jesus. And she's like so frustrated.
A missionary.
I was like, Bud, like it takes time. Like you want to get to know the person and it's about them, like, but we can love them through our actions. But anyways, it was just kind of a cool reminder to me even of like our approach, how we approach people. And it's interesting seeing it through the eyes of even your 7-year-old. But I'm like, it's encouraging to me that he's mindful of that.
Right, he's thinking about it, right? Yeah.
What do you guys think? What are some of the things, like recapping the entire book, what are some of the things that, like chapters that like really hit home for you? You were like, oh, Jesus, why did I have to read this? I know, Carrissa, you shared the God problems. But I mean, what are some of those key points you were like, man, this is definitely life-changing. I'm so glad I read this because I need to apply it. So
I think living unoffendable. That's one of, there were plenty, but one of them is because Jesus is my stabilizer, sustainer, source, all of these things, I can be unoffendable. I can be. If I choose to be or not, I don't know. But I don't need to be offended easily. And that was a huge lesson for me this year. Big lesson.
So many.
That sounds freeing too.
It's freeing.
Yeah.
I'm not like I haven't arrived or anything, but
No,
I do
but
feel
that's-
that he's released some of that where
It's
I
an
can
option.
experience freedom and friendship.
Yeah. I mean, we talked on the selfishness one together. That was one that really hit home, just being aware of our weaknesses. So just making sure that I am doing the work to make sure that those don't affect relationships, especially within the family of God. And so making sure that, like what you were saying, like the reevaluating, going before the Lord and not becoming prideful and having a humble posture, considering the other person better than myself, or like walking myself through that really stuck out to me. Just knowing our tendencies.
Yeah, and remember she listed friends,
Yeah.
what type of friends we were, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna be one of those. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's me. And then, but it was a good way for me to just be very, very mindful of the ways that I can come off that way, you know, and just, you know, the bullet points that she read, I was like, ouch, 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 ouch. But it was good because I'm like, I'm being confronted with truth, you know, and I have two choices. I can either turn from it and keep going my own way, or I can say, okay, God, I need you to change this in my life. And I feel like he definitely brought me to that point, you know, reading that chapter. Yeah.
I liked in chapter 6, I think this is the quote that stands out the most in her exposure portion. Drawing near to God is different than drawing near to anyone else. Unlike our friends, God is perfect, holy, sinless, glorious, high and lifted up. As we draw near to him, it will by nature expose how far from perfect we find ourselves. And so that's just been sticking with me. Just as a reminder to like keep myself right with the Lord and have him as my true friend. And then I don't have to expect so much out of others. Not that I don't want things from others, but if it doesn't come, I won't be let down or hurt. Or if it does come, like, oh my gosh, thank you, Lord, for that blessing. Like, just being closer of a friend to God, because he will not let me down. Like, even if I put unrealistic expectations on my friends, he won't let me down. And so, I think just,
That's huge.
it's humbling
Absolutely.
and challenging. And
When she talks about the things that we need from friends to deepen our joy in Christ, friends to battle with us, friends to carry us in our weakness, friends to be there for us. And but one of the things that I was thinking about in the section about friends to deepen our joy in Christ, that you could look at that as one-sided, right? But what I have been trying to do and what I feel like I'm being led to is just to be joyful in all of the different places of friendship, whether they are new friendships, what are the things that I can pull out of those things to be joyful and to see Christ in that relationship. And that's not something that she explicitly talks about here, because when we think about being joyful in Christ, we think about it as an added benefit, but that opportunity that I got to sow into somebody, it was a difficult situation, and it may not have felt good in that moment, but to be joyful that there's an openness in that relationship to have that conversation, just to think about it that way, to look at those silver linings of all of those friendships and every person that I have a relationship. What is it about that person that is good for me, but is also good for them? Like, what is that relationship? So that's just been something I've been really just resonating on, and thinking about all of the people in my life in that way.
That's good.
I also like the fact of her talking about the treasureless field. I felt like that was such a good analogy, such a good description of how we can look at friendship. And if we're digging in a treasureless field, what are we going to find? Nothing, right? And so I feel like for me, that was just such a good reminder, even as a married woman, you know, who has been, having a great friendship with my husband prior to us getting engaged, prior to us getting married, but just reminding, like, that's not my source of hope. That's not my only source of love and companionship. Like, it has to come from Jesus first. And that relationship will have an outpouring. It will naturally flow into all of my other relationships. I feel like that's important for married, single, widow, for us to remember, like, that first source has to come from Jesus.
Right. And you can't, that's the thing. And I don't think I could look for those silver linings in all of my relationships without Jesus. Because otherwise you go into that place of, so-and-so's really nice, but
Right.
I really don't like it. And I just, when I have those thoughts, I just turn them off.
Yeah.
That's just not what it is. I can pray about that,
Yeah.
but I don't need to hone in on that negative thing, because there are things about me too
Yeah.
that I'm sure.
Thank you, Lord, for your grace.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Like,
Look in the
ooh,
mirror, right?
that
But
crazy.
without Jesus, you can't do that,
No.
right? You're constantly looking at what's wrong as
Right.
opposed to what's right.
There you go. That's a good word. That's a
Wow.
good word.
It's been a good word all summer, all series.
Good book.
I've
Pick
been
this
thinking
book.
about these brownies.
She's been eyeing
It was
them.
a team effort in picking this book. We did read it ahead of time, the women's leadership team, and as we read it, we had no idea we would be in a pandemic COVID
Yeah.
season of isolation. And God is in control of all the details, and I think this was a timely read for
Oh
us.
goodness, yes.
Yeah.
Timely
It
read
was
for
good
us.
for me.
So cheers to friendship.
Cheers. Ching, ching. Make the eye contact, everybody.
Yeah.
Brownie time.
Brownie
Friends-
time.
Friends eat together.
There you go.